On a quiet street in St. Louis, Missouri, stands a house that holds more than its fair share of secrets. The house was built in the 1890s, the Plant Avenue House, and it's witnessed the passage of time as well as the many lives of those that called it home. But some of those lives, they seem to linger long after their departure, creating an atmosphere thick with tension and fear. Tonight, we delve into the unsettling events that has made the house infamous amongst all of the paranormal circles. Everything from apparitions in the hallways, unexplained noises in the night, and the ever-present sense of being watched. The families who call this house their home, they've all encountered the unexplainable. And as each family moved in, the haunting stories, they only grew darker. Tonight we unravel the spine-tingling tale of the Plant Avenue House and the families who have battled the unknown within its very walls. You've just found yourself in another episode of Retraced Echoes.
Before we dive deeper into the dark history of the Plant Avenue House, a quick reminder. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on our latest episodes. You can find us on all major social media platforms: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Follow us for behind-the-scenes content, updates, and more. And don't forget to visit our website at www.retraced-echoes.com to submit your own stories and connect with fellow listeners. Now back to Bert and the secrets of the Plant Avenue House.
Now, as many of you may know, I just recently returned from a much-needed vacation. Now, while it was refreshing to take some time off and get a little bit of rest and relaxation, it did put me just a wee bit behind schedule. So to catch up and ensure that you still have your weekly dose of the eerie and unexplained, this episode is going to be just a wee bit shorter and a little bit less research than what I typically like to do. However, I can assure you, the story of the Plant Avenue House is no less compelling or chilling. Sometimes it's the simpler tales that leave the most lasting impressions. So settle in as we explore a quicker, yet equally haunting narrative that continues to captivate those that dare to listen. Now, to understand the haunting of the Plant Avenue House, we got to journey back to its very long and storied past. You see, in 1956, the house was sold to the Fury family, who moved in with their two young daughters. Now, strange occurrences, they began almost immediately. On 2 consecutive nights, at exactly 2 a.m., Miss Fury, she felt the very unmistakable sensation of being shaken awake while she was completely asleep. She opened her eyes to see nothing but darkness. And on top of that, she didn't hear anything but the eerie silence that filled the room. The feeling was so strong that she couldn't just dismiss it as just a mere dream, or I guess in this case, a nightmare. And each night, there was a question of, would this be the night that she would be shaken awake? Some nights, it would go completely silent. She'd be able to sleep through the night, but with apprehension. Other nights, she would go to sleep relatively quick just to be shaken at 2 a.m. Now this, it left her very unsettled. She was determined to try to find the source of the disturbances, so oftentimes Miss Fury, she just stayed awake, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was happening. But on the nights that she would fall asleep, she just couldn't hold her eyes open. At 2 a.m., the familiar sensation of being shaken awake would begin again. And even stronger than before, she'd sit up, her heart pounding. But like usual, she would see nothing in her room. Now, there was one night when again she had fallen asleep, and at 2 a.m., just like clockwork, she'd be shaken awake. She would look around, and just like many nights, she didn't see anything. But this time, she heard a very faint whispering. Now, these whispers, they seemed to almost come from nowhere. But she decided to try to follow the sounds. As she walked around the bedroom, she determined that these were coming from the hallway. So she goes out into the hallway and she follows these sounds all the way to her daughter's bedroom. That's when the noises completely stopped. The house fell silent once more. Now, this experience had left her questioning her very own senses. But the regularity and the intensity of the disturbances, they were undeniable. Now, even though many people, myself included, would find being shooken awake to be absolutely terrifying, Miss Fury, she had an experience that was almost equally as bad in many people's minds. While she was completely asleep, something struck the headboard above her head. Now, she immediately woke up. She didn't know what it was. She turned on her light, assuming that she would find a large dent. But when she looked, there was nothing out of the ordinary. The headboard had remained completely intact, with no signs of damage. Now, this would be followed by something beating hard against the window. It almost sounded like it was a large bird flapping its wings against the very glass. But again, why would there be a bird so late at night hitting the window? None of that made any sense, so she would go to the window. If anything, just to try to understand what was happening. But when she got there, the window showed no sign of damage, and on top of that, there was no visual reason for why this sound would be made. One morning, she would go downstairs. She would find a fixture that was attached to the wall laying on the floor. Now, the fixture had been properly installed. There was no reason for it to even be there. And on top of that, it was just laying in the middle of the floor. Not broken, no shattered glass. There was no rhyme or reason for any of this. Now, adding to the growing list of disturbances, Miss Fury, she started to hear footsteps walking up and down the stairs at daytime as well as at night. Now, the steps, they were heavy and they were deliberate, as if someone was frantically searching for something. Now, these footsteps, they always stopped at the very top of the landing, creating an atmosphere of unease. What was going on inside of their home? Why was all of this happening? Now, surprisingly, Mr. Fury, he typically didn't experience any of these strange occurrences that was plaguing his wife. Now, that all changed one night. Mr. Fury, he was suddenly awoken to a very translucent white shape that passed straight through the bedroom door. Now, he was scared to death. He did not expect to see that. So he quickly got up and he opened the door and he saw the shape floating right down the hallway. Now, it was heading towards his daughter's bedroom. That was not a very lucky daughter. As he watched the shape, it suddenly just disappeared. Tried to rationalize the experience. He told himself, it must have just been a car headlight or something like that coming through the window. But deep down, he knew the sight was unlike anything that he had seen before. Now, this encounter, it marked the very beginning of Mr. Fury's own experiences with the unexplained phenomena that was happening inside the Plant Avenue house. Now, surprisingly enough, with a little bit of time, the family kind of got used to some of the paranormal activity that was happening inside the home. That sounds very odd to those that might not have dealt with a ton of hauntings, but when you deal with something like a residual haunting, you get kind of used to some of the things that happen inside the home, like the footsteps. Being shaken awake is obviously not something that I think anyone would get used to, but everything seemed somewhat benign. That was until one morning at breakfast, their young daughter, the same one that they kept hearing and seeing things go into her room, she told her parents about a lady that was dressed in black who keeps coming into her room late at night, and she's holding the little boy's hand. Now, the parents, they were kind of taken back by this. This was a very disturbing account. In fact, this new detail had added kind of a layer of fear to their experiences, as it suggested possibly there was something more complex and possibly something a little bit more sinister that was happening inside their home. Now, with the daughter telling the family this story, the family kind of started to realize that maybe these are not random occurrences that's happening inside the house. They could possibly be connected to the history of the home. Or dare we say, connected to the people that used to live there before. Now, when we talk about the woman in black, there was another occasion that the daughter claimed that the lady in black tried to strike her with a broom. Now, she described this experience as terrifying and somewhat kind of strange, because the very moment that the broomstick was supposed to hit her, she didn't feel anything. Now, after 9 years of enduring the very strange events that was happening inside the home, the Fury family, they finally had enough. They decided it was time to move, to leave the Plant Avenue house far behind. Now, next was going to be the Walsh family that moved into the house in 1965. In fact, November of 1965. They also had 2 young daughters, Wendy and Sandy. Now, shortly after moving in, Miss Walsh had, we'll call it, an experience. Now, Miss Walsh was preparing dinner when she noticed that her dogs was kind of shaking in fear, almost like they had seen something. Now, she was obviously very curious as well as concerned, and she looked up to see a human-shaped white cloud that was floating from the kitchen into the living room. Now, her immediate thought was, well, that's a ghost, but at this stage, she wasn't really scared. The apparition, it was moving silently and gracefully. Now, that left Claire in a state of awe as well as confusion. Now, little did the Walsh family know, but this was just the beginning of the encounters with the unexplained phenomena in the very house that they call home. Now, Claire already had her suspicions about the house. In fact, when they first come to inspect the property, she felt like she felt a presence, but she just dismissed it as her imagination. You see, Claire believed that she had telepathy. She had had many strange experiences, or some would say events, as a child. In fact, when she was very young, she saw the presence of her aunt's spirit long before anyone knew that she passed away. Now, these previous experiences, they made Claire maybe more attuned to the unusual or to the paranormal, but she always tried to just rationalize and kind of move on or assume it was her imagination. Now, her sensitivity to the supernatural, it was only heightened by the sense of unease and some of the strange things that was happening inside the home. Now, Claire would find that the house seemed to come alive at night with different noises, different knocking and banging noises, the sound of almost like nails being scratched across the wall. Now, at this stage, she became very unsettled. In fact, the family started discussing all these different paranormal things that was happening inside the home to their neighbor. And the neighbors themselves said they were going to purchase their home, but a friend advised against it. Now, when they asked why the friend did that, the friend said that they had been a house guest in the home on many occurrences, and that when they were there, they also had ghostly phenomena, which led them to believe that the house was haunted. So that family took that advice and said, yep, we're not buying that home, but they did buy the house that was right next door. Now, this revelation, it only deepened the Walsh's family concerns. And if anything, it confirmed that the events that was happening inside the house, it was not just their imagination. Now, these was not the only occurrences that was happening inside the home. In fact, there was a whole lot more, and it almost acted as though it was escalating. The longer the family was there, the more things that they had experienced. A prime example of that is at midnight one night, Miss Walsh said that inside of her room, she smelled like a musty odor. She would later say that it smelled like death itself. There was also occurrences where she would go and she would find the attic door. It was wide open, and after she would close it, when she'd come back a little bit later, it'd be open again. In fact, one evening while she was resting, she heard the very distinct sound of the door opening and closing on 4 separate occasions. Now, she would later ask her husband, was you just up in the attic? Now, he would say that he had been, but only once. So in her mind, who had been up there on the other 3 occasions? Now, as time passed, the family, they would normally hear footsteps going up to the attic. They would hear the door open. They would go up there and they would close the door right back up. And each morning when they would go check, the door would be open again. Now, the attic was only used to store old furniture. In fact, she was the one that kind of moved everything around. Everything had its place. Some would say that she was borderline OCD. It's almost like walking into a store. Everything had a spot. With all the noises that was happening upstairs, she kind of wanted to understand what was happening. So she climbed the stairs and she looked up and she was in complete shock. The entire upstairs was in complete disarray. Now, while inspecting the attic, she had found there was a heavy chest with the drawers wide open. She walked over to it, looked inside the drawers, and there, inside was some blueprints that was from the original owner of the home. Now, she looked around. She looked at the furniture being moved around, and the first thing she thought was, well, my family's not been up here. In fact, I was up here relatively recently myself cleaning. Why is all the furniture moved, and what is somebody looking for? Now, this wouldn't be the only strange occurrences that was happening inside the home. I mean, the unexplained movement of the furniture and the discovery of the blueprints, it was adding to a growing mystery and to the fear surrounding the attic as well as the home itself. But to give you an idea that this isn't the only thing, the following day, Miss Walsh was awoken to footsteps in the hallway, almost as though someone was walking up and down. Now, these footsteps was echoing in a very quiet home. But again, that was just one other little small thing. The next morning after that, it was 4 a.m. and for some reason, Miss Walsh felt compelled to go downstairs into the dining room. When she would get there, she would find the door to the cabinets just wide open. Some of the utensils had been rearranged, almost as though someone again was searching for something. What were they searching for? Now, the weird thing about this haunting is that there is certain things that kind of give it the impression of being like a residual haunting. And by that, what I mean is it's the same time frames. Prime example, the dining room we just talked about. It was 4 a.m. the very next morning, and she found some of her clothes that was in the drawer had been disturbed. Now, these drawers, much like what I was talking about with Miss Walsh before, she would put things in there in a very specific order. It was always organized. And now that it was in complete disarray. Again, almost as though something was searching for something. Now, she had remembered her daughter was complaining about hearing drawers that was constantly opening and closing at night. Now, these continued disturbances, they didn't make sense. This wasn't an intruder that was sneaking in. And Miss Walsh couldn't make any sense of it. Now, one day while Miss Walsh was in the basement, her daughter Sandy was outside playing. She suddenly heard the sound of a child running through the dining area. Now, she figured that Sandy had come from outside and was running inside, and she called out to her daughter, but there was no reply. Now, concerned, she ran upstairs to investigate. She found that nobody was there. Despite the very distinct sound of a child that was running in the house, it was completely empty. She thought to herself, great, now I've got another ghost running around the house. What a weird thought to have. Now, we're always talking about the women in the household experiencing certain things. We only talked about the previous owner's husband once. I think it's time to bring the husband into this story also. It was on a Sunday. The entire family went to church, all except for Mr. Walsh. Now, he had stayed in bed. Eventually, he became hungry and he went downstairs to have some breakfast. He heard the sounds of a child running up the stairs. He figured, well, clearly the family must have just gotten home. He went to go check and there was no one there. Now, when the rest of the family returned, Mr. Walsh, he explained his experience and they discussed the numerous strange events that was happening inside the home. In fact, Mrs. Walsh believed that there was possibly 3 different spirits that was inside the home. It's one thing to believe that your house is haunted. It's a very different thing to believe that maybe there's more than one thing. Now, a few days later, Miss Walsh, she was doing some laundry down in the basement. There was a sweater that was hanging up, and all of a sudden it came off of the line and it fell right at her feet. Now, all the windows was closed. There was no breeze. But the truly baffling thing, the sweater didn't drop straight down. It dropped at an arch, almost as though someone had thrown it, like an unseen hand had grabbed it off the line and threw it right at her. Now, a few days later, she was again woken up to the sound of someone that was up in the attic. She didn't even fool with getting up. She had become so used to hearing these different sounds happening up in the attics, as well as when she'd get up there, she'd always find the furniture rearranged. And lo and behold, the very next morning she would go up and guess what she would find? Again, all the furniture was rearranged. There was a trunk that had been moved to the center of the room, a dollhouse that had been relocated. But the weird thing is there was a toolbox that she had never seen before that appeared right in the very room. If she was looking around, she saw there was almost like a thin layer of dust that was on the floor, and it almost looked like a child had scribbled a name. Now, 2 days later, she was all alone in the house and she could hear the muffled voices coming from upstairs. She quickly ran to the attic and once again, she found that the attic door was wide open. There was no one that she saw upstairs. The very next morning, she heard someone calling to a child in the attic. Now again, she was all alone in the home, and it was clear that there was no one that was from her family that was up there. Now she was starting to get the idea that maybe this was a residual haunting. Now, I understand where she's coming from. It almost seems as though that's what it could be, but the fact that these are changing so sporadically, almost like there's an escalation. In fact, the very next morning at 5 a.m., she could hear the very distinct sound of a typewriter. Now, the only typewriter in the house was in her daughter's room, in Wendy's room, in fact. She would go check later and she found that it had been used. In fact, the lid had been replaced the wrong way, and there was a doll that was placed on top of it. But it wasn't her daughter that was doing the typing. Their dog, once relaxed and easygoing, it was now a nervous wreck. It refused to go to certain areas inside the house, especially the basement. It would never go to the basement. Now, they say that a lot of times pets will have a sixth sense. It's almost like they know that there's something there, something going on. Now, with all the things that was happening, the Walsh family, they had their fill. They absolutely didn't want to deal with this house anymore. The haunting and all the things that was happening. Their dog that was a nervous wreck, so they decided that they were going to move out. Now, on the very last day that they was there, they could still hear the sound of scurrying footsteps, a haunting reminder of their time in the Plant Avenue house.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and stay updated on all our latest episodes. You can find us on all major social media platforms: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Follow us for behind-the-scenes content, updates, and more. And don't forget to visit our website to submit your own stories and connect with fellow listeners. Your support helps keep the podcasts coming. Also, if you're a fan of unsolved mysteries and deep dives into the unknown, be sure to check out Deceptive Reality, a podcast Bert co-hosts with his buddy Nick. Every Friday, they take on a different unsolved mystery, exploring every twist and turn in detail. From missing persons to paranormal phenomena, Deceptive Reality brings you the most perplexing cases, inviting you to join them in unraveling the mysteries.
Well, with that, it wraps up another spine-tingling episode of Retraced Echoes. Now, I hope you enjoyed this tale, even though I know it's a lot quicker than my typical format, as well as it wasn't much of a deep dive, and it probably was more of like event to event to event to event. I hate doing that. I prefer to kind of let things marinate, but unfortunately, I just kind of had to quickly put this one together. But regardless, I want to thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us on all of our social medias. Also, visit our website, www.retracedechoes.com, and submit your own stories. That way you can connect with fellow listeners. It's because of your support it helps us bring in all these spooky tales. Now, until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and keep questioning the shadows. Who knows what you'll uncover when you retrace the echoes. Sweet dreams if you can. Until I see you in the next podcast, goodbye.